This podcast is part of a group which relates to revision classes given at Slough Grammar School in the summer of 2013. The course being studied is the Edexcel Certificate, and this particular lesson deals with ways of approaching unseen poetry, and it is one screencast of a pair. To be absolutely clear, in the session where this was delivered, we started off by discussing the nature of this particular question within the exam, placing it in its paper, English Literature 2, and making sure that students were clearly understanding of the two assessment objectives that are examined on this question, AO3 and 4, but also that they understand the format, if you like, of the question that they're going to have to respond to. The point to emphasize here to anybody listening to this for the first time is that the students are required to engage totally with the effect of writers' understanding, writers' use of language, writers' use of structure or form. In other words, it isn't enough just to quote and say there is a simile in line 5 or whatever it might be. It is a requirement to discuss how writers create the effects they create, and that therefore we are focusing all the time on writer's choice. What I suggest here is a method of approaching the question within the exam. First of all, read any question, underline any key points within that question. And I suggest, having done that students are used to practicing in such a way that they have a given structure for their essays. Although there will be bullet points given, I always feel that a structure that you can repeat again and again and again when writing analysis is very useful at this stage. And the one that I would always tend to encourage students to use is SLIME. The S can be structure or setting, doesn't really matter, and you can adjust it to suit yourself. Language, imagery, meaning, effect. The point in an examination essay, when you only have 45 minutes, is that this gives you a clearly structured 5-paragraph essay, if planned. In front of you, you have your unseen poem, and I suggest the first thing you do is to read it the first time, annotating, even at this stage, perhaps underlining really powerful language, underlining unusual effects, perhaps relating to structure, punctuation, or language, things like single-line stanzas, very short lines, things of that sort of nature. Having done that, and got quite a successfully large pile of ideas to use within the writing that you're going to do, then read it again. And this time, concentrate a little on voice and situation, thinking to yourself, who is speaking? Is the narrator of the poem the same person as the person within the poem? Or is this actually something different? Is this a first-person poem? Is this a poem by an omniscient narrator observing actions, for example? Is there a recognizable tone to the poem? Is it an angry poem, a sad poem, a scared poem? What is happening within the poem? And again, write all over your exam paper. Give yourself the clues. Annotate heavily at this stage. To clarify some of these, voice is a question of who is speaking. We consider person, and therefore their perspective on the matter under discussion. Are they actively involved, or are they standing observing? In terms of situation, or setting, I suppose, we're looking at where it's set, when, era, when, hour, who's involved, what actually happens. Does anything happen in the poem, or is the poem a philosophical discussion of an abstract concept such as love? These are the things at this point to think about before moving on. SLIME, L, language, looking for whatever we can find. Now, there's two types of language in SLIME. There's language and there's imagery. And imagery is interesting. Imagery is often either very straightforward, literal imagery, as it is, full of descriptive words, descriptive colours, whatever it might be, or it's the more complex, figurative imagery, which relies on metaphor and simile to, amongst other things, to develop the ideas. This, of course, generally challenges the reader to engage at greater depth with the material, because if we have to interpret the metaphor to understand why it's being used, we are automatically engaging that much further in it. It's vital all the time that all the comments you make begin to comment on the effect of the language choice, rather than just settling for the make the reader think variety of comment. In short, if you can still say why or how after your concluding sentence, such as makes the reader think, well, how does it make the reader think? Why does it make the reader think? Then you have not explored far enough. Ultimately, though, and this is effect, if you like, in slime, you are required to discuss what you actually feel when you are reading it. This is a personal response moment. It's a moment of thinking. What does it make me feel? Also, what does the poet want me to feel? Now, there's a comment in brackets on this slide, and this refers to the poem that I'm going to discuss in the other PowerPoint and briefly here, which is Heaney's Midterm Break. This is not because it's an anthology essay, it's not because an anthology poem, rather this is simply because I adore Heaney. I've always enjoyed this poem and it's a chance to work with it. There's no reason why it might not turn up in an exam paper. It's worth, therefore, considering. So here is a typical question. Consider the poem carefully, write about it as fully as you can, and then there are some bullet points. The poet's attitude to his subject, descriptive skills, language used, poem's effect on you, and any other aspects you consider to be of importance. You can make these quite easily fit the slime mnemonic. I'm not going to do this for you. I think this is a good point for you to pause, think about the slime, and think, how do each of these bullets relate to slime? Because you're going to use that in your response. So pause now, and then come back when you've done that little bit of thinking. The poem itself is going to be discussed in a second PowerPoint. So at this point, I will leave it in front of you, and I will not spend time in this screencast discussing the poem in any depth at all. It is simply enough that it's there, and hopefully you can pause it, give it a read, and then carry on working through this PowerPoint. The questions that follow now are questions which, in terms of a class discussion, are questions that within groups can be tackled. That doesn't mean to say that if you are listening to this on your own, you can't just do these for yourself. And again, this will be material that in the second PowerPoint, the sister of this one, we will discuss in greater depth. But just looking at the ideas here, how do you know what Heaney's attitude to his subject is? You might like to consider how long it is before he tells us what has actually happened. Is there figurative language in here? If there is, where is it? The poppy brews might excite you. What is the narrative perspective of the poem? Who is speaking? Does it change? May or may not. What might be the purpose of any changes you find? It may not change, but just asking the question. What other, apart from the figurative language, what other features of language interest you? Are there features of structure or form that interest you? And how does the poem make you feel? If you can develop a short response for each of these ideas, you will have a perfectly good essay ready to go.